しようもできないな。逃げよう。決定!
Right with you there, brother. After a rather superfluous recap prologue, Nozomi was being checked out by Kain, who couldn't find anything naturally wrong with her, so of course it turned out to be that one little detail that was conveniently sidelined for a few weeks. Yeah, not too surprisingly, Nuts revealed that the time flowers were connected to the lifespans of organisms, and the cures transforming were accelerating their decay. He also revealed that they were connected to the destruction of locations. And yet, why is the flower representing our country dying such a slow death? But yeah, the big takeaway was of course that they were dangerous forbidden powers that they shouldn't use, even though they still ended up using them after the initial warning. Bruh, you're in an anime, that's just another Tuesday. Though, honestly, as cliche as all this was, I didn't have that much of an issue with it, as one, there was much worse stuff that we could complain about later, and two, I do like my classic protagonists who are willing to sacrifice a part of themselves for the benefit of others. That said, I can complain about some of the execution of this plot point. Actually, I think she's just wondering what you're smoking because she shouldn't need a time flower. Yeah, I've seen commenters try to justify this by saying that Kurumi always had a time flower, even though one clearly didn't bloom for her first episode back as Milky Rose. As we've seen, these are fairies who only really use human forms as disguises, and therefore aren't necessarily tied to ages and can adjust their forms. Did she somehow lose her milky palette like her human friends and the flower was replacing it? Even though again, magical creature who's tied to magical items. Really, it just feels like they added Kurumi to the time flower list just to add to the drama and suspense, even though they've established nothing with her.
You realize how messed up that sounds, right?
And speaking of characters with unexplained ties with their old magical devices, again, where are these two? Saki and Mai ran into the queues as they were scoping out for their next YouTube video, which was kind of ironic when they started to explain the nature of Belle. Well, thank you for that very blanket statement in what's supposed to be the adult show. Yes, once again, the show went into full Al Gore mode with very blatant environmentalist messages. And look, I'm not saying that global warming isn't a thing, because it absolutely is. But again, I really don't like shows from big corporations like Toei, of all places, pointing the finger at us when this very anime is a prime example of nostalgia baiting. Alright, to be fair, idiots like that who try to make it big online are the greatest evil on this planet. Though seriously, hasn't the show been like celebrating the fact that the Qs became successful social influencers and just had them provide this whole exposition about environmentalism as they were walking around with their phones looking for new material for their YouTube videos? And this is why I really don't care for eco-terrorist villains, as their messages will ultimately be muddled by the very nature of the shows they come from. Anyway, Belle realized that the show was starting to run out of episodes, so now was a good time as any for an all-out attack, and fortunately for her, there was a whole buffet of cartoonishly dickish assholes to feed off of, because the show doesn't understand subtlety. Thus the Precure had to head out, which included Nozomi. Then of course she chose to go out in spite of Coco's warnings, and oh hey, there's that ship that everyone is kind of over at this point, for good reason. And then I'm sure you'll abandon her the first chance you get, am I right, dude? Again, I don't outright hate this ship, but I also really can't bring myself to care about it when it's played out so melodramatically, whilst ignoring some of the more admittedly toxic aspects of it, like the Fairy King ghosting this girl right after these events. Hell, as many questions as I do have for Kurumi and her supposed time flower, I'm frankly more into her convincing Nuts and Syrup to let her go do her thing. As at least this exchange feels like it's coming from a place of genuine respect and admiration for both parties, as Kurumi has put in the work to become a better secretary for them. Anyway, after a barrage of reused and old animations, we got another unnecessary blast from the past.
Huh?
Like, did these futari find some time flowers, or did they just decide it was in fashion to wear clothes from when they were kids? Really, the only truly great thing in this episode was, of course, the main man himself, Bumby, as he appeared in a very well animated and yet kind of cheap looking scene of Nozomi rescuing him. I mean, yeah, their movements were nice and smooth, but what's with all these cheap still frames?
私はドリーム推しなんだ
Okay, him doing the Yuno face actually kinda makes this all worth it. Anyway, after a little Naruto running, Nozomi ran into Urara and appropriately Rin.
変身するなって言ったのに
Don't be the kettle calling the pot or the pot calling the kettle.
Yeah, let's just wrap this up. So, the Yes and Splash Star teams made their way to the clock tower and tried to use Talk no Jutsu with some of the most cliched lines ever. Like, again, is this really supposed to be the adult show when you have characters talk with such broad platitudes?
私もあなたたちと同じ
You and I are not so different.
No, I guess not. So, the episode ended with Belle saying she wanted to get rid of humanity to save the planet because, of course, that's her goal, and yet she's no Master Asia, so don't even bother. It really says something when the only thing I really found great in this episode was the former baddie being voiced by a guy who recently did the Japanese dub for an Adam Sandler character. I mean, I don't think I outright hate anything here, but I also just don't sympathize with any of these characters and their conflicts anymore. Part of that was the very overt environmentalist messages that I was never really a big fan of, but mostly it's just how not so adult the writing is here despite the title. For a show that initially boasted about how they had more adult messages, like how some problems can't be fixed the same way as they were when we were kids, it ended up really falling back on those old tropes and messages, didn't it? I don't know, this all just feels like such an empty sequel where its themes and characters become so contradictory to themselves. Because in a way, and as cliched as a line as it was, Belle was right. The Precure, and by extension this show, refused to change. Now, of course, they'll more than likely end the story with the Cures rejecting the Time Flowers and moving forward with their adult lives, and yet, really, the damage has already been done. They've solved many of the conflicts of the show by going back to the days of past, by even throwing in the same old lines and messaging. Now, I wouldn't have a problem with this if this were the Sunday morning show, but this is literally called the adult show, and yet this final arc is becoming nothing that much different than whatever's going on with Hero Sky. As such, I'm just left questioning what was even the point of the show other than some cheap nostalgia baiting, which they didn't even bother to hide in this one. Not helping matters was how unnecessarily melodramatic a lot of this played out. Like, I didn't really bring it up, but there were scenes of all the other Cures trying to get the resolve to fight Belle, even though they're not in the same condition as Nozomi, and they would theoretically only need to transform one more time, making it not that much of an issue aside from Nozomi, leading to a lot of this episode just feeling like some empty filler. The only interaction I kind of cared about was Kurumi and Nuts, as aside from the questionable flower stuff, at least she brought up some relatable adult issues in regards to her job training for her king, which just makes me ask, why did we get 2 Splash Star episodes and not at least 1 focus episode for her? That and Bumpy being genuinely entertaining as all hell were the best parts of this episode, but even his greatness couldn't save the show from collapsing in on its own inability to maintain any strong theming or messaging. And overall, I just kind of found this whole episode pretty meh. This was a show that tried to act a little more adult, and yet came off more like a child wearing daddy's clothes. At this point, I'm really looking forward to going back to the 1 review per weekend format, as even if this were the best thing ever, I just don't have the energy to do it anymore. Don't worry though, everything else on the show is being produced normally, so you can look forward to some more Precure content, and maybe some other subjects in the near future of 2024. And until next time though, farewell for now my friends, and if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go see if I can wear some of my old shirts from high school. And the answer is a resounding no.